Awesome. Okay, why don't we give a warm welcome to Marisa? She's going to come up again and do round 2. And just a reminder, the next week is the final week, and that's the big one on relationships, marriage, dating, all that fun stuff. So you guys want to make sure you're here for that. Invite your friends out. And yeah, why don't we give a warm welcome to Marisa?
All right, it's good to be back. So thankful that you returned and you weren't afraid to dive in a little deeper. So I didn't exactly see how many of you went home and took a test or did a little more soul searching. Let's see some hands if you just spend a little bit of time talking or think that's great. Excellent. And is this anybody's first time? Okay, wonderful. Welcome. Glad to have you here. As I was sharing last week, it's really great if you came with somebody, and if you didn't, that's okay. But it's really excellent if you can sort of discuss the things that were aha moments for you on your way home, or maybe later in the week if you can reconnect. That's always good, just to process what you've been thinking about, and maybe some things will pop up for you that you weren't expecting. And that's always great, too. And it's really important to discuss these things, I think, and not keep them to ourselves, because you never know. Maybe something that you're discovering or learning about yourself is a question that somebody else is having but hasn't asked yet. So no question is untimely or too simple, or even if I already said it a million times, please, you can ask me to repeat it. That's not a problem. As I said, you never know who else is wanting to ask that question. So please feel free to stop me at any point, and we will have time at the end as well for just strictly questions and answers. As much as I can answer, I will. Sometimes I don't have the answer. So we'll review a little bit of what we did last week. So for those of you, this is brand new. Hopefully we'll just be able to pick up and keep running, okay? So we'll go over the all 9 types, and try not to pay as much attention to the names that are attributed to each type, because the reason for that is oftentimes when we're growing up in our family of origin, or maybe in high school or college, we can assign types or names to people that often stick with them, and so they take that on as their own, and that might not be your type at all. For instance, a child can often be called mommy's little helper, and they just have that imprinted in their mind, which is not a bad thing if you called your child a helper. I think that's great, but it's something that can be imprinted in us, and so if we see those names that we've been called, we are automatically drawn to that. When that, or a peacemaker, that's often the type for 9, and that's maybe not your type at all, but it's some behaviors you've exhibited that mirror that type. So does that make sense? So really just try to focus on the number and the core fear and the core desire. That's really where you're going to lock in your type. Anything that's behavioral that's not always a good indicator. Okay? So we have the 9 types. Just by a show of hands, is everybody familiar with all 9 types? Yes? Good. Okay. Are there 3 or more people that need to hear all 9 types, a description? I don't mind going through them briefly. Okay, let's do it. So 9 is often known as the peacemaker. They look for ways to maintain inner peace. And so, although they can often be called, there have been animals and colors and all kinds of things attributed to each type. The 9, unfortunately, is often known as the sloth, because they tend to fall asleep to one aspect or more in their life. That being said, one aspect or more. So every 9 is going to look differently. Not all 9s are lazy. Most are not. There's just one area of their life that they choose to avoid and become asleep to, because addressing that component of their life would create conflict. And of course, they're trying to avoid it. So that is the just the way of keeping themselves safe. That's the 9. We'll get in deeper. These are just going to be the general overviews of each type. The 1 is often known as the perfectionist, but as I said last week, most perfectionists will never call themselves a perfectionist because nothing is ever perfect enough. So I prefer to name these ones the improvers. They can walk into a room, look at a spreadsheet, see a group of people, and know very quickly what needs to be improved. And they can either vocalize their opinions about what needs to be improved, or they can just hold it inside and wait to be asked. It doesn't really matter the type of, whether they're extroverted or introverted. That really does not play a part in whether they're a 1 or not. It's just that constant feeling like, oh, that needs to be fixed and that needs to be fixed. And it could be about themselves or it could be about others. For 2, they're often known as the helper. They're the most others-oriented on the Enneagram. They struggle the most with FOMO, fear of missing out. They love to be needed, but that's not really an attribute that a 2 would like to be described as. They don't want to be needy. In fact, they have a hard time articulating their own emotional needs, but they will know the minute that you are beginning to feel a little bit frayed at the edges. They're very aware of others. And so we will talk more about that later, but I put supporter there because they've got inclusion on their mind. And I'm not talking about, the politically correct way of being inclusive, which of course they would be too, but they are literally looking for ways to include others. They will often pull up more chairs beside them to make sure, so-and-so feels like connected to people. So it's not a philosophical inclusion. It is a tangible inclusion that they're always trying to provide. And it's a beautiful thing. So for 3s, they're known as the successful achievers. There really isn't another way to say it. Sometimes they're described as the entertainer, and that can be true or that might not be true. Not all 3s are on the stage in front of people. They might just be exceptional entrepreneurs that you never know their names, but they're just really driven. They achieve. Their goal is to be successful, and so they always see the finish line. They are very ambitious when it comes to relationships. They can see very quickly in a room who does what strength they might be able to bring to the table, and that can often help their ambitions, or it can be a detriment to them personally. There's always 2 sides, right, to every coin. So just keep that in mind as we're going around. If it seems like I'm focusing on the dark side of one type in particular, please just put up your hand and say, can we know the good things too? Because sometimes I forget. But that's the successful achiever. They are very optimistic. Again, they can be introverted or extroverted. They can be really, really ambitious when they're working a room, but very timid, and focused and quiet when they're not having to be on. 4s, they're often known as the romantics, the melancholy types, highly emotional. Those are negative attributes, and so I like to think of 4s more as the innovators, because not all 4s are traditional like poets and potters and artistic things that start with a P. I can't think of any more, but really they don't need to be involved in traditional forms of art. Math can be art. Science can be art. Anytime there's an opportunity to innovate with unusual components and bring it together, whether that's solution-oriented projects or, if it is traditional art, the innovators think outside the box. They also love to be noticed as somebody who is outside the box. They really are drawn to unique, refined expressions of authenticity. So that could mean anything you want it to be. The possibilities are limitless. What they are repelled from, if I could say that, is just the American dream or the mundane, ordinary 9 to 5s just do not sound appealing to a 4. They want to live an extraordinary life. They want to live life to the fullest. And that's why when they feel an emotion, they actually want to maximize whatever that is. It can be anything from dark. A lot of 4s are drawn to horror, which is really interesting. That would be something that would frighten me. And I often remind my husband, please do not fall asleep as the scary parts are happening, because that feels very unfair. He doesn't mind a little bit of scariness in the shows we watch. But I do. Now, a 4 sees it as very artistic. And, yeah. So one time, if you listen to any Enneagram podcast, there was an interview. I cannot remember who the person was, but they were doing sort of a funny gift idea episode. So gift ideas for each type. And one of the friends that the host called was a 4. And so he said, what would be a great gift? Like, this can be practical or not practical for a 4. And the guy suggested a snowflake dripping with blood. And I mean, like, okay, that is just, terribly unpractical. But it's a great picture of how a 4 thinks. Like, it's totally random and unique, and like nothing else, and who would ever think of that? But it is kind of funny. Anyway, so if that helps you at all, like, it's okay. Like, dark, scary things are okay for a 4, where that might be troubling for somebody else. It's just a different perspective. It's a more artistic view of life. Okay? 5s, on the other side, you'll notice there's a gap between these two. And we'll get to more of that later, but I want you just to keep that in mind, because although these two are very, very different, and they are like separate, as we can see on the diagram, oftentimes people are confused about whether they are a 4 or a 5. Both are very passionate types, but in very different centers of intelligence, which is what we're going to talk about next. The 5 is often known as the observer, or what's the other way? I'm trying to think that they're often called. I can't think. But anyway, there's lots of different names for all of them. And I'm sure if you visited any of the Enneagram sites, you're going to see like, oh, man, this is so different than what she talked about or what you've previously learned. Again, we're just focusing on the numbers. But 5s love to take in information and learn all that they can. In fact, they have sort of an obsession with whatever topic it is that they're studying. They want to be the most advanced as they possibly. They want to be top dog. They want to be top dog in their field of study. And it's normally a very niche field of study, like a very specific topic that they have chosen to do a PhD in or whatever, but they're just obsessed with learning. And it's hard for them to release information to others because they feel like it's not ready yet. It's not ready yet, and it's never ready. So 5s really need those deadlines and those external boundaries to force them to release the information that they have spent so much time learning, and the rest of us need to know that information because it is so important, but they have a hard time letting it go. Internal resources for a 5 are very precious. So whether that's their emotional energy, their time, not always, but 5s can often be minimalists because they just don't want added pressure or clutter visually, emotionally. It's just easier. Now, I would not say that is something to look for if you feel like you're a minimalist. It doesn't mean that you're a 5. Just something to keep in mind. My husband is a 5. He is not a minimalist. I would definitely be more of a minimalist than him. But again, it just really depends on your life and your experience and all of that. We'll talk about that too. 6, I have named them, and I have not seen this anywhere, but this is what I've landed on. I've named them the contributor, because 6 is really like the secret superhero of the Enneagram. They can shape shift however is most needed in their community or the context of where they are. So what I mean by that is they can fall in line and be a part of the community, or they can rise up and take the lead if there is a vacuum of power. Now, the 6 is going to be the person in your group who is watching the person who is in power. Especially if they're new, they're going to test and wait and see. And if they come to the conclusion after a certain amount of time, they've normally given themselves a set amount of time. If they've decided that this person is trustworthy, then they are typically loyal for life. But they will never stop looking out for chaos, possible catastrophe on behalf of the group. It is not typically for their own benefit. It is for the best of everyone. And so those behaviors can often exhibit like a 1, because they want things to be right. But it's for different reasons than a 1. A 1 wants to be right for the reasons of personal integrity and moral uprightness, and they want to be seen as good and right. Whereas a 6 wants to do the right thing for the sake of the community, for psychological safety, personal safety, and based off of, this might be the most important component, based off of historical evidence or data. And so oftentimes their decisions can appear emotionless and just very, very factual and data-driven, but that's just how they're wired to make decisions. And that's a really important component of what we're going to discuss tonight, because this is where complexities and misunderstandings happen all the time. The way we make decisions, the way we show up, especially at work, especially within our families of origin, we just take for granted that everybody thinks the way that we do, right? We assume that people come to the same conclusions with the same pattern, but that just isn't the case. So if you don't learn or hear anything else I'm saying tonight, please know that there are so many ways to come to a major life decision. And I know for my husband and myself, we can agree on a major life decision, but we come to it from different perspectives, and that in itself creates conflict. So we'll talk about that some more, but just keep in mind that for 6s, they can be whoever they are needed to be, but they're going to still analyze the data, the facts. They're going to make sure it's safe for everybody. They're really, really attuned to creating safe environments. Okay? Whereas 9 is thinking about internal peace. 6s are trying to avoid external catastrophe. Okay? And then 7s, 7s are known as the enthusiasts. But they are also in that head triad where they're analyzing the data. So whereas 6s and 7s, of course, they're side by side, but I like to think of them as escape artists, but they're cousins, and so they have different ways and reasons for wanting to escape. 6s want to escape a situation because of danger or chaos or something not being safe. 7s want to escape because there might be emotional darkness, frustration, just discomfort, emotional discomfort. They're always trying to avoid pain. So you might see a 7 as somebody who is like the classic Tigger, from Tigger and Pooh. And that's how they're described often in books. And so it's good to read a variety of sources. It's good to listen to a variety of podcasts if that's what you prefer, because you're going to see each type painted in the way that whoever the author is, whoever those people are in their life, that's how they painted them. And that actually was what led me to avoid the 7 initially when I was learning my own type. I read a chapter where they painted the 7s as a real Tigger, and I thought, well, I'm not hyper, but I do avoid pain. I do things to distract myself from possibly sitting in emotional pain. And so they are connecting emotional information from the people that they're with in order to create a more positive experience. If that is not possible, 7s will just pick up their stuff and go, and they'll do the Irish exit. Does everybody know what I mean when I say Irish exit? Some crowds I'm with, they're like, what? And so I will explain. It's really just leaving without saying goodbye. So going to multiple parties and just you never, like you saw the person, but they never said goodbye. That's often a 7. They have never acknowledged probably that goodbyes are hard, and they just don't care to really address that in their life, and so they just exit. I am a 7, if I did not say that from the beginning. I think Josh is a 7 as well. Yep. Anybody else in here a 7? No, not yet. Not yet. Right? That's okay. All right. 8s are known as the commander or the chief or the boss or the bear. Like there's all kinds of names for 8s. They really are the most tender-hearted on the Enneagram. They fear betrayal. They fear betrayal. And so often a lot of the decisions that are made seem very quick, harsh, and just like, what? I didn't even know there was a decision to be made. And 8s go ahead and make that decision on behalf of the group. And oftentimes they're with good reason, but 8s really, a lot of, the source of where these decisions come from is they're trying to avoid betrayal, either by their staff or their family. Sometimes people complain that 8s are controlling or demanding, and it's this need to know or have a certain hand in your life or your situations, but it's in an effort to avoid betrayal. And that is a hard thing for 8s to come to agreement with. But if you ask an 8, because a lot of 8s would say, well, I don't want to control people. I don't really need to be the boss. I really don't need to be. But if you ask an 8, would you like to be in charge, or do you want to be told what to do? If you have to choose and right away they will say, I'd rather be in charge. They know. There's often a big presence that 8s bring with them. Not always, but it's pretty common. And we'll get to their stress and growth, but that will reveal a lot of why they are an advocate. They will fight for the underdog, not always, but if there's an opportunity to fight for justice, 8s will do that. Okay, and we're up at 9. Any questions so far? That's just a brief overview of all the types. And you may be sitting here thinking, well, I think I'm 3 or 4 of them. Is that a thing? It is a thing, and we'll get to that, but you will have a dominant type, and hopefully we'll get a little clearer as the night goes on. So, yes. Yeah, so they're all connected. I do have another slide that shows arrows and things, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight. They are all connected because we are all the types. We really are. You're going to see parts of yourself in every single one of the descriptions, but there is movement. So, for instance, if you were to look at my type 7, I go to 1 in stress and 5 in growth. And every single type has those 2 arrows that they move in organically. It's a diagram. It doesn't really have a function other than that. But yeah, I've shown in my workshops a similar slide showing the arrows, and I think visually it's a bit overwhelming, and people have a harder, like they want to hold it and see it, and so I feel like it's not as necessary, but just know that there is organic movement that happens between all 9 types. Okay? And then wings, which we touched on very briefly last week, is that the wings have to shoulder your dominant type. So I can't have a wing of 3 or 9. My wings can only be 8 or 6, okay? So they have to shoulder your dominant type. It's less important for you to know the wing. I know a lot of people lead with that, and that's perfectly okay, but your wing is your behavior, not your motivation. So you might take on some of the behaviors. Like I might take on the behavior of a 6 and start analyzing the data and you know, be a little bit more suspicious of people in authority. But I would say that those behaviors show up maybe because of my parents, maybe because of my parents' types. Yeah, so don't worry too much about the wings. If you love wings and you want to know your wing, there's lots of resources you can find where you'll be able to read a description and know right away. Some people believe that, you know, you have one in the first half of life and the second half of life the other wing develops. You know, you can have one or both, but really it's behaviors that you adopt from your neighboring types. Okay? Any more questions before we move on? All right. So we are going to, well, I'm going to ask you actually to consider these 4 things. Your actions, what do you do most often when you're sad, frustrated, or angry? Okay, and that may require you to think of the last time you felt any of those 3 things. Maybe it was just an hour ago on the way here, earlier this afternoon, or earlier in the week. What do you do when you feel sad, afraid, or angry? Is there a physical sensation? Do you call someone? Do you need to get away, go sit in your car if you're at work, have a nap if you're at home? Like, what is it that happens when you feel those things? Okay, and your thoughts? What is your sequence of thoughts when you feel most afraid? Are your thoughts spiraling? Do you all of a sudden feel like you want to organize something tangibly with your hands while you think things through? Do you call someone? Do you want to paint? Do you want to draw the line and yell at everybody? Okay. We often assume that what we do in stress is what other people do, but we all do different things. We all do the same things, but for different reasons and at different times. Okay? So we have to think about our thoughts. Emotions. I often say that people in the head triad don't often know what it is they're feeling. They have to think about it. Let me think about that, is something a 5, 6, or 7 might say. Let me just give that some thought. When it's a very emotional situation. Okay, that's very common. And physical sensations. So I promise this won't take very long and it won't be too weird. If you don't mind, if you could just close your eyes for a second, just so you're shutting down some of your senses, and think about what happens when you feel like you need to speak up, or someone has disrespected you, whether it's your time, your finances, verbally maybe. Okay? And what is the feeling that you most often feel when those moments occur? Is it swirling thoughts? Does your jaw get tight? Maybe your stomach feels like fire. Okay? Can anybody pinpoint what that feeling is of tension in their body? Yeah? Okay, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much. I know it feels kind of weird to do that in a group setting, but these are the kinds of moments we have to take if we really want to self-assess, which I think we all do, right? But it does require just maybe going outside of the norm of what we would normally do, talking to somebody, journaling. We really do have to take a moment and breathe and take stock. Take notice of what you feel in your body, because your body, did anybody read The Body Keeps the Score? Fascinating and true. Our bodies are these biological, warning signs. They give us them. I know for me personally, when I feel stress or I need to speak up or something is not quite right, I feel it in my gut. And isn't that interesting? Because in stress, I move to 1, which is a gut type. Okay? So these things are very helpful in informing your dominant type. And it's not ultra weird. It's everybody has something that they do in stress. So if you can think back to maybe just regular everyday stress you have in the workplace or at home, wherever you find yourself most often, jot that down. That's really important. It's really good, because there are times when we do need to pay attention to those tensions, and there are other times when we can dismiss them and just say, nope, I am choosing to do something else right now. And that signal that's going off, we can rewire some of those neurological pathways. I do believe that. So good to notice, not totally hinged on your decision tonight of what type you are, but good to notice. All right, so looking at, for those of you who are still wondering about your type, these are some contributing factors, but also just some good things to keep in mind. So starting over on the right-hand side, does it take a long time to discover your type? Yes, it does. It can often take years. That's a little bit more unusual. Certain types will know right away. There are just very clear things for certain types, and I won't say what those are, but if you already know your type, then good for you, and just stick with it. Dig a little deeper. See if you can uncover some of the ways in which you've learned to adapt or grow. Should I attempt to type others? What do you think the answer is there? No, don't do that. The reason why is because we get it wrong. We get it wrong. I get it wrong. Other teachers get it wrong, because when you're typing somebody else, you're typing them based off of their behaviors. And behavior does not determine type. Type is determined by motivation, core fear, or core desire. And that is completely internal. We all do the same things, but for different reasons. Okay? Generally speaking, we all do the same things, but for different reasons. So to type somebody from a distance can be damaging, because you're saying, oh, I see this in you. And, you know what people read from that is my big flaw. They see this as my big flaw. So let somebody come to the table on their own. You can set the table. You can give them documents to read or podcasts to listen to, but let them come to the table on their own. That is the very best way. And it's a great way to have a conversation when they're ready. Okay, will the Enneagram help me diffuse conflict? Yes, it will. If you are willing to own your part in the conflict, it is such an extraordinary tool for having a conversation that is not emotionally charged. And if that's something you're always trying to avoid or you fear, it's so excellent. It's so excellent, because you can say, this is my experience, and this is how it made me feel. Do you have any questions about that? I know that I typically do this when I am stressed, and I'm learning that I need to grow in this area. You can say all those things, and that is such a wonderful, healthy place to be in when you can give somebody else permission to not be offended, because you're learning and growing and you accept your part in the conflict. I think it's wonderful. I've had just some wonderful conversations because I've been able to sort of diffuse, and it doesn't take away the blame, but it does enable you to say, I acknowledge that I struggle with this. And for some people who've never been able to say those words, it's empowering. And it does release the pressure from the other person as well. So I encourage you to do that when you feel like confident in your type. Should I be embarrassed if I pick the wrong type? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I was living as a 3 for about 8 or 9 months. And 3s and 7s are pretty similar. A lot of people get them mixed up because they both like um, aesthetics, and they both like to make look things great and have a great experience, but they really are motivated by different things. They have different fears. And one of the big differences between them is the centers of intelligence. 3s in the heart, they are emotionally repressed, but 7s are in the head, and they have no organic movement to the heart. And we will talk about that. But if you find 6 weeks from now that you feel like you're a different type, then please dig deeper. The only thing that can come from it is that you're going to learn more, and you're going to have more compassion for other people. Oftentimes, and this is not a dismissal, if you have found your type quickly, I am cheering for you, because it is a very good thing. But oftentimes people who learn their type, they walk away from the rest of the Enneagram and just feel like they're done. They've learned all they need to know. People who are confused about their type and discover they are actually another type end up having more empathy because they have taken more time to learn and grow and understand others and the differences between the types. And so that's okay. So I hope that takes the pressure off of you. Yeah. Okay. Can my type change? No. And I'm just going to leave it at that. If you have questions at the end, we can definitely discuss. Are we born with our type? Yes, I do believe we are. Does introversion or extroversion contribute? No, it does not. There are traditional stereotypes that are often true, but please don't let your final type be hinged on that. Does trauma affect my type? Yes, it does. It will affect how it expresses. But again, I do believe that we're all born with a wiring. And yeah, I mean, you can take it or leave it. But that's what I've come to learn. Does my behavior determine my type? No, it doesn't. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, so there can be so many different expressions of one type. So if we're looking at a 5, think of it like different shades of blue. There are so many different shades of blue. And if you can think of that, it is really helpful because you're going to meet people who say they are your type. And you're going to be sitting there thinking, no, you're not. Nope, we are nothing alike. Absolutely, you are not my type. And that's okay. You can absolutely feel that way. But if you think of it like the spectrum of blue, there's so many shades, right? And it can move into purple. And it can move into green. And that's okay. And you just need to let those people be their type and maybe make another journey. But that actually helps people sometimes to know that there are different expressions, okay? So what affects the expression? Your upbringing 100% affects the people who raised you, whatever their type is, whether they know their type or not. It's going to affect how your type expresses, okay? Your life experiences. Where have you lived in the world? What is the culture like? Have you had big T trauma or little t trauma? You know, small traumas that we all face. The pandemic, you know, all of these things. How have you coped? What's your community like? What's your living situation, your job? All these things. Ongoing stress is a big one. I told everybody last week, if you're going to take the test, just take note of what time of day you're taking it at. Are you taking it at the end of a long day where it's been very stressful? That's going to affect your outcome. You may type as your stress type if you take the test then, which is fine. You will learn and you will grow and eventually, you know, come back to center wherever your dominant type is. But it's good to take note of that. Introversion or extroversion. Now, that does not affect what your type is, but those two things will affect the expression of your type, okay? So 5s, this is a great example, and my husband did give me permission to share anything at all, okay? He's a 5. That is so unusual. 5s are very private, and they value their privacy. They really don't want people requiring of them without their permission. So he does not like it when I volunteer him for things, which I do. He's a beautiful pianist, and yes, I'll just leave it at that. It is very easy for me to tell him to to do things, and he will do them because he loves me. But he is the most extroverted 5 I've ever met. He never tires of going out with people, and as long as he's had, enough times to study and be in his books, which is kind of what he does for a living, he's always ready at night to party. And I am done because I've just given my all day long, meeting with people, and I do have a sleepiness issue. I do have narcolepsy, but that's a whole other story. So yeah, it's very unusual. Sometimes I will joke that he is more extroverted than I am as a 7, but again, it doesn't really matter. I'm really quite introverted compared to most 7s. So just keep that in mind. It will affect how your type expresses. It did take him a long time to settle on 5 because of that, because 5s are always painted as a recluse in books. When you read about them, podcasts are a little bit more open to different personalities, and of course you can hear people's expression and their tone of voice, so that really helps. That's why I do encourage you to listen to podcasts, but just be aware that whoever those relationships are that the author has with a person in that type, that's how they're going to write the chapter. So don't be deterred by how they describe that type. Okay? That's a lot about expression of type, but I really hope that helps you, because sometimes people will zero in on a segment that I've shared, and then they will miss an opportunity to find their type. Just be open, okay? So the centers of intelligence we are going to dig into. Again, we've got the heart, the gut, and the head. These are just some quick questions that can help guide you in your process. We went over this last week, so I'm going to just skip past this. This is the breakdown. And this is where you'll see right away where you go in stress and growth. This is very critical. If you don't hear anything else, really try and focus on where these numbers go in stress and growth. Because you're going to notice this week, as things arise, things unexpected, the way that you pivot is going to help you see where your path of growth is, or what your type is, okay? So starting with the gut triad, we have 1s, 9s, and 8s. So that means they do things. They are doers. But 8s are the ones in that triad that wake up with a fire in their belly. Now, I'm not an 8, so I can't say that that's for sure true, but I do know, I did describe to you the feeling I feel when I am stressed, or I feel there's an injustice, because that's me moving to 1. But 8s I know, including my wonderful sister who is an 8, she wakes up with a fire every day. She's just ready to go. She loves it. She's not afraid of conflict. She's not afraid of people. And she can sense when other people are an 8. It's really interesting. 8s really love people who will rise up to their level. So this is why oftentimes the 8 is described as the bear. Because now I am not from Alberta, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But I have been told that if you encounter a bear, have bear spray. We have 2. And my husband loves to hike. But aren't you supposed to get big like a bear? Is that right? Okay. Well, I thought I heard that. Anyway, with an 8, you're supposed to rise up to their level. So if you find yourself in a confrontation with an 8, or somebody who may be an 8, they actually respect you more when you rise up to their emotional level. And what that means is it's kind of easier to understand in the opposite of if you don't back down. People who back down are often disregarded by an 8. They don't often sense the emotions of others unless it is a big emotion. So you can see how this could create conflict in a boardroom table. Everybody is feeling tense and upset by something an 8 said, but they're trying to conceal their displeasure. And so an 8 carries on. Whether or not you disagree or agree with an 8, They want that challenge. They want someone to take them on and rise to their level of passion. Does that make sense? If we have any 8s here, do you mind raising your hand? Does anybody feel like they're an 8? Yes? Would you concur with that? Okay, that's all right. This is what I've heard, so this is what I'm sharing with you and what I have read as well. It's very important. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about 8. In stress, they withdraw and go to 5. So that can often look like, again, this is a behavior thing, so it may look different for other people, but it can look like I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. And so just like they can make a decision without people knowing there's a decision to be made, they can just up and go and nobody even knows. What just happened? Why are they upset? It's a quick withdrawing. 4s, 5s, and 9s are withdrawing types. Okay? In growth, they move to 2. And this is where you see the softer side of the 8. And this is really their heart. They're compassionate, others-oriented. They will fight for the underdog. Their heart is for injustice. And so they take on the big issues that the rest of us are feeling like, how will I ever make a difference? And 8 feels like, oh yeah, I'm going to make a difference. Yeah, no, I will. Like, there's no doubt. They charge ahead. But in growth, they can take the time to notice the emotions and the feelings of others. And that is more of a decision on their part than other people's part, right? There's a responsibility that comes from within to stop and notice. All right, so type 9s. Now, the 9 is pretty interesting. 9 observes where the conflict is, feels the calm before the storm. So if we're thinking of it like a glass top surface of a lake, just a beautiful lake, pick one. There's so many here. They're lovely. They are cold. We lived in Atlanta, so I am still adjusting. But just pick the most beautiful lake in your mind and think no ripples. It's not frozen yet. It's just a beautiful, serene picture, okay? And a 9 is always trying to preserve that glass top surface. They don't want to ripple. They don't want to wave. They don't want to pebble. But a person can only maintain that for so long. And what happens with a 9 is because they're so serene, but they are in the gut triad. So how does that work, right? All of a sudden, it is a volcano that cannot be tamed. There will be an anger that rises from a 9 that scares them. They didn't know they had that much anger inside of them. It scares the people around them because it's so unfamiliar behavior. And it's just this, incredible rage that comes out of nowhere, seemingly. But it's because they have suppressed their anger about so many little things. They've avoided it for so long that they can no longer avoid. And it erupts. Okay, we got to speed through this. They move to 6 in stress and 3 in growth. So oftentimes 9s will be the person who is a stage person, if that makes any sense. They will be the performer, like in the truest sense, because they are very placid and easygoing. But when they get a microphone or they get an opportunity to kind of be in the spotlight, they really shine, and people are always like, where did that come from? I didn't know they had it in them. This is what we see happening in people when they move to their stress type or their growth type. Okay, for 1s, again, these are the improvers or the perfectionists. They observe error. They have an inner critic that cannot be turned off. They feel resentment in their gut. So they do feel that gut sensation, but it is more internal anger. So their anger does not go out, it is in. They withdraw in stress and become emotional. They do feel all the emotions. They just can't hold it in anymore. And then in growth, they move to 7 and they often break free. They're often the fun parent or the fun person when they can let their hair down. So at the end of the day, where a 1 has been very on, very process driven, they get home and the kids are going nuts and they're fine with it. And it's so unusual, but they're able just to break free from the rigidness of their normal pattern when they are in a situation where they're very, very safe. That is sort of a hallmark of ones. Okay, the heart triad. They observe the needs of others. This is type 2, feels empowered when supporting. This is when the 2 feels the strongest and the happiest. They do not like it when things are planned and they are not invited, because normally they are the one putting on the shower or throwing the birthday party or doing the office get together. So when they're not invited, it is a double pain to their heart, because 1, they weren't asked to do this, and 2, they weren't invited. They do need to be needed, and they don't really want to say that with words, but it is a truth for 2. They're gripped with shame in their heart because they don't want to be needy. And so when they are upset by their neediness, this is where the shame comes from. The heart triad in general does deal with shame. It all looks a little differently, just like the anger in the gut triad looks differently for each one. They set boundaries when they are stressed. They move to 8, and the enough is enough. And in growth, they create. They withdraw and they create, and it's a really healthy thing. Whereas for 1, it's stress mode when they withdraw. So it's the lower side of 4. But for 2s, it's a really good thing, and they often, do traditional art or something creative. For 3s, they observe opportunities with people, places. They're always looking for ways that they can serve their dreams and goals. And it's wonderful. They often have entrepreneurial spirits. They feel motivated by ambition, gripped by the need to win. Even a loss can be turned around, and that can be turned into a win. They withdraw in stress, and this is how you know a 3 is in trouble, when they're like on the couch, zoned out, doing Netflix, and they're not, their normal, fiery, put-together self. That is a red flag if you have a friend who's a 3. And they can become analytical and very, very anxious thinking, anxious behavior in growth. Now, there are ways that 3s can learn to work with that, and they can recognize that, okay, this is actually a good thing, that I am considering all of the data. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. A lot of 6s are used to the feeling of anxious thoughts and swirling ideas, thinking worst case scenarios. That's just the normal. I had one workshop, and I do have permission to share this, and I know we're getting close to time, but we had a 6 in the class, and I was describing all the ways that 6s think, and said, this is just a very normal thing. Just as 1s are used to their inner critic, 6s become used to anxious thinking, and it doesn't make them anxious. That's actually a very healthy and safe place for them to be. They are shocked when they realize other people don't think the way they do. And a young lady in the group just put up her hand and said, oh, so like you mean the way that I have already pre-planned what I will do if I get hijacked on the highway on the way home from this class, and I get mugged or stabbed, I had the whole thing planned out in my mind. And we're all like, oh, okay. But this is normal, and this is how they think, and it's absolutely typical, right? Just as the inner critic sounds really terrifying and tormenting to all of us, but that is something that the 1s have learned to live with, and they're shocked that others don't also have an inner critic. Okay? So these are really good to know, because once you recognize that and you have somebody in your life who has seen that this is their dominant type, you can have so much more compassion. It's wonderful. It really is. All right, type 4, last one in the heart triad. They observe their own lack, so they can often walk into a room and feel like, oh, I didn't get the memo. Why is everybody wearing pants and flip-flops and I am wearing, whatever. Doesn't matter. Just whatever it may be, they may feel like they missed the memo. At the same time, they do enjoy being different, being, standing out from among the crowd. They feel everything times 10. And that is a good thing. That's a healthy thing for them. It's typical. I feel very anxious thinking about that, but that is typical for a 4. They are gripped with shame of jealousy. Okay, again, they're in the heart. There's shame that takes on different forms for each type. Jealousy is the thing for 4s because they want what you have. They don't necessarily not want you to have it, but they would like it too. And that really resonates with a 4. Reaches out to others in stress. This is very typical. They'll call somebody and be very caring and compassionate, whereas typically 4s will want to just share all of their thoughts and feelings, and they're sometimes unaware of their own oversharing, I guess is a way to put it. But when they're stressed, they recognize I need somebody right now, and so they'll reach out to somebody, maybe in hopes of, after asking them, how are you doing, maybe that person will ask me back. I really need somebody right now. And that is unconscious behavior. They create order and growth. So 4s typically do not like routine. That is actually a bad word to them. So what we try to encourage is rhythm. So you don't have to have a routine, but you need to have a rhythm, because otherwise you may not get, normal life things done. So that this is something that we recognize and we see, and a lot of 4s learn to adapt. Really quick, head triad, the 5s, they are very interesting. So they move to 2 aggressive types in stress and growth, 7 and 8. So they can become really unglued when they're stressed, more interruptive, interjecting, like cracking jokes, and this is just such a diversion from their typical focus and really placid attitude. I know my husband does this when he is stressed, and I have to say, what is bothering you? I'll be talking to the kids, maybe a very stern conversation, and he is cracking jokes in the middle of my rant to them. And so that is a red flag to me. Like, although it's very funny at times, not always, it can be very funny, and it seems like he is just like in a great mood. He's actually very stressed. He's feeling unglued from his normal groundedness, which is really interesting. And in growth, he rises to the occasion, or a 5 will rise to the occasion. They'll feel this confidence to release all that they have learned, all that they've compiled, all of their research. The 6s observe gaps in data. They feel compelled to test leadership. We talked about this. Comfortable with anxiety, avoids chaos. And in stress, this is so interesting, where they're typically very calculated. They become mouthy, very verbose. If they're stressed at work and it's just like a regular everyday stress, they will often gossip, and they just need to verbally process all that they've experienced. And they may love the people they're talking about, but they just cannot say a nice thing. It is just all verbal when they're stressed. And when they are in growth, they can be present. They can just listen to others and focus on relationships. 9s are very relationally driven. They're not necessarily data driven. And so all of that data kind of just fades into the background, and they can be present. And that's a real sign of growth for 6. Finally, 7, they observe experiences, patterns. They're looking for connections. They're often looking for, I don't even know how to describe it. It's often hard for me to teach on 7s because I am one. But they're always looking for connections. They love connecting other people to experiences that they would love, or people who have common interests. They just love making connections and seeing people like be happy, find joy and a better experience. They feel comforted by options. That is a really unique thing to 7s. They don't want to feel limited or trapped, definitely not trapped in pain. I think I told you last week, the biggest fight Phil and I had over and over again was, it would always end with me saying, you just don't want me to have fun. And it was, really like feeling limited in my options was the feeling I had. Perfectionist and stress, very orderly and process driven, and oftentimes that is used to process emotions. And in 5, they become focused, withdrawn, and needing to compile information before they can make a decision. So that's a lot. We're going to stop there. There's lots more to learn. I do just want to give time for maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then I know we need to wrap up.
Yeah, so if you guys have questions, I'll just come to you, and then you can tell me, and I'll put it into the mic just so the online people can hear it as well. So are there any questions? Oh, we got one here. Hi.
Great question. Yes, and it varies. Like it's so specific to the person. So just as all the criteria for what can affect your expression of type can vary, like I think there's like 7 different things. The level of trauma or mental illness, it's case by case. Yeah, it really depends. There are often times where the individual can recall living in their stress type for an extended period of time and then coming back to center. But other times there's just not an awareness, or medication, can make a difference once that is the right triad is found. So yeah, it really varies. Good question.
Got another one here.
Yeah, so the wings are, they have to shoulder either or neighbor your dominant type. And we would take on some of the behaviors of that type. So whereas we can't determine your type solely on behaviors, because it would be misleading. You could be behaving in stress. You could be exhibiting wing behaviors. So that's why it's very, very important that we don't type based off of behaviors. I do not take on the behaviors like maybe overpacking or always keeping a sewing kit in my purse. I can't believe I do that, but I do. That would be a behavioral thing that I would adopt from 6 being my wing. Planning for chaos, essentially. But I don't fear chaos. I don't fear leadership tricking me or fooling me, or I don't feel responsible for the community as a whole. I am a 7 because I'm trying to avoid pain, but there are some practical ways that I have behaved. I don't know if that helps you. Dominant type, yeah. They're the wings, yeah, and you only use those behaviors. So some people may see me and think, oh, she's definitely an 8. She likes to be in charge, or she has to have the final say, or they're observing behaviors that maybe look like 8. But only I know what my core fear is, right? Like nobody else can name that for you. Core fear or core desire. And just as I renamed all of the types, it could just be the wording you're reading that you're just not connecting with, like, oh, that fear, it just doesn't make sense to me. I think I'm everything, but the fear is like, no, that doesn't make sense. Read something else. words are everything, okay? Or listen to another podcast. If you're very, very stuck, I would recommend Dr. Beatrice Chestnut. It is a very thick book, but you don't have to read the whole thing. You can just flip to the pages that pertain to you or you have questions about. This is what really locked it in for my husband and I, because she describes the subtypes. There's 3 subtypes for each type. So the book is called 27 Pathways. It will give you a broader understanding, though, of that type and how it can express. It's very, very helpful if you're a reader and you like that. Otherwise, she's on lots of podcasts. Does that help? Okay. Yeah, so your type is determined by your core motivation. And that is really hard to unpack personally, to self-assess for your core motivation. So it's easier to identify your core fear or your core desire. Why are you doing what you're doing? What are you trying to get out of it? And that's why we did the whole exercise with the feeling and the thinking and the doing and the thoughts. All of that plays into what your motivation is. So pay attention to that. Yeah, great question.
Maybe 1 or 2 more. Sean?
Yeah, say the first part of the question again.
So, societal culture and expectations.
Yes.
Do you think those could change a person's natural core motivations?
I think no. Short answer, no. Long answer, it will change their behavior, for sure. Which is why, were you here last week? Okay. So last week I talked about living in the American South. Women, religious women of faith, they will often type as a 2 because it is culturally appropriate for women to be service-oriented, others-oriented, inclusive, inviting, hospitable, all the things that we would attribute the behaviors of a 2. But the core motivation does not necessarily line up. And so I think it affects how the type expresses. It's a very good question because I think this is what it boils down to when people are really having a hard time finding their type, because they will say, I feel this, but I do this over and over and over again. And there are things that culturally are just ingrained in us and our society expects. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
Maybe 1 more, guys, if there's a final one. Nobody? Okay. With that, we'll probably end it. Why don't we give Marisa a round of applause, guys, just for her time tonight. Yes. Marisa, is it possible these slides, can they be posted later? Are they public or are those? Okay. Awesome. Okay, so if you guys want, we will create a resource sheet probably at the end of the next week, for the 3. Okay. Yeah, next week is the relationship one. So if you guys, do you want to maybe touch just a little bit more on that one, what it's about?
I'm very excited about next week's. So like we discussed a little bit about how to have those really difficult conversations. And really the most difficult ones are with the people who are closest to us, right? So even if you're not married, if you're dating or want to be married, I think this is going to be really helpful. This is something we can all learn to do better. And that's accepting areas for growth for ourselves, but accepting hurt on the behalf of someone else, even if we did not intend that. You can see from this information very, very in depth, and there are so many different ways that we can take offense. So many ways. And so if we can learn to talk about maybe where those roadblocks are, I That's high level, but we will dig into it next week. How to have those conversations. If you can, do some digging on your own type before coming. It will help so much.
Awesome. Just want to highlight one more thing. We've partnered with something that the church is doing for these backpacks. So if you guys saw the Christmas trees on the way in, we are filling up kids' backpacks for kids in need over the holidays. So you guys can grab one of those, maybe fill it out with your small group or your family. And that's a way that we could partner and just, give some practical help to families in need during this time. Thanks again for coming, guys, and we'll see you next Thursday.